everybody. Welcome to another episode of Still Learning. Today we're going to be in D&C 115 to 120. Rebecca, can you give us a little summary of what those scriptures are all about?
You bet. So in D&C 115, the Lord talks about building up Zion in Far West, and something that's become very important to us recently in the last several years, the official naming of the church as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In 116, we get the revelation about the location of Adam-on-Diamond. 117 talks about the immediate duties of William Marks, Newell K. Whitney, and Oliver Granger as they're still working. We're going to get into the history later, right? But just resolving things in Kirtland. In 118, the Lord gives his will concerning the 12, where they had lost several members of the 12 to the Kirtland apostasy. 119, the Lord gives direction with regards to the law of consecration and tithing. And in 120, we get established or the Committee on the Disposition of the Tithes, which is something that's still in place today. But Gunnar, there's so much history, and I bet you have been deep into the history this week.
The early history of the church is fascinating. And one of the things I like to say is I don't think there was a day in the life of Joseph Smith probably after he saw the angel Moroni when he was 17, that wasn't remarkable. Yeah. I like to say that he lived an epic life. So what we're going to cover today is April 26th to July 8th. Okay. So it's just a few months in 1838. But to really put this in context, to really understand what's going on behind the scenes as these revelations come to us, I think it's best if we back all the way up to January 12th. It's a little bit of an overlap from last week, because on January 12th, that's when Joseph receives a revelation to have the first presidency and their families depart Kirtland as soon as practical. And this is because there is so much contention because of the failure of the Kirtland Safety Society that happened in July. So it all sort of leads to this head. Now, this revelation is not canonized, but you can find it in the Joseph Smith papers. It's under Revelation 12, January 1838-C, the letter C. There were 3 revelations that he got on January 12th that are not in the D&C. Okay. So this revelation says to the entire first presidency to take their families as soon as practicable and move west as fast as the way is made plain. They are told to trust that the Lord will be with them and be at peace in Zion. Otherwise, there shall be no safety. And Joseph and Sidney, they leave that night. They get this revelation on the 12th. They leave that night after making arrangements for their families to follow them, and they're going to meet up during the journey. They're in Ohio.
Yes.
It's a roughly 900-mile journey in the dead of winter. And Emma, when she leaves, she's 4 months pregnant. And the trip takes 2 months. She arrives in Far West 6 months pregnant. And she's had so much difficulty with her pregnancies earlier in their marriage that it's just wonderful that this one she successfully delivers Alexander Hale Smith, who lives to adulthood and is there at Emma's bedside when she passes.
Yeah.
I love the way George Buchanan talks about this particular time in his book, The Life of Joseph Smith the Prophet, chapter 35. For those of you who don't know, George Buchanan was a teenager in Nauvoo, and he ends up in the first presidency with Brigham Young. So this is what he records. He says, with the dawn of the New Year confusion and mobocratic power increased, And on the 12th of January, 1838, Joseph and Sidney were driven from Kirtland to escape mob violence. Their destination was far west, and they were pursued more than 200 miles by armed enemies seeking their lives. The weather was intensely severe, and Joseph and his companion, with their families who had joined them, suffered greatly in their endeavor to elude the murderous pursuit. Several times the pursuers crossed the prophet's track. Twice they entered the houses where his party had gained a refuge. And once they occupied a room in the same building with only a partition between them, through which the prophet heard their oaths and imprecations concerning him. Thus were they protected by divine power, else murder would have been done, for the long and unavailing pursuit had filled these would-be assassins with a fiendish desire for blood. Owing to the severity of the season, 2 months were occupied in the journey to Far West, which place the prophet and his family reached on the 14th day of March, 1838, accompanied by the apostle Brigham Young, who had journeyed on the way. Brigham Young had met them a part of the way into their journey because Joseph had left so quickly he didn't have enough money to cover all of his expenses for that trip. And so Brigham Young brought him more money and then traveled with him at the last part of that journey. The story about staying in the same room with only a partition between them is an amazing tale. I've read in other sources that they actually met the people who were trailing them, seeking their lives, and they didn't recognize them. It's really quite a remarkable escape that they made. So now he's journeying with Sidney, right? And somewhere between 60 and 200 miles into this journey, into this 900-mile journey, the family meets up with them. They wait like a day and a half for the family at one point, then the family reaches them. And so I'm thinking in my mind, the family, this is Emma, right? Emma, 4 months pregnant. She's got 4 kids with her and their dog. And their dog is not like my dog, it's this 25-pound animal. This is a white British Mastiff.
Oh.
It's one of the largest breeds of dogs, like a small horse, right?
Hard to feed, but happy to have when you're in danger for your life.
Yeah, I'm just saying it takes some caring for, right? The other thing is that you've got Phoebe Rigdon, who's also coming to meet Sidney. Now, I don't know if the two families are traveling together or not, but Phoebe's got at least 6 kids with her. And these women, unbelievable women, so strong, right? So remarkable. And to think, the husband comes home. I've just received a revelation. I'm leaving tonight. Pack up the kids. I will wait for you in this town, some miles out. I'll wait for you for 36 hours, which, I mean, means you got to pack up the kids, everything. You got to leave within 36 hours. And they just pack up and go. Hey, amazing. They arrive. He gets there March 14th. And for the balance, he arrives with Emma, right? The whole family arrives together. And now for the balance of March, Joseph is having to deal with church councils, excommunications, and he's working on reorganizing the church because you had this church leadership in the West, the presidency of the West that had come out of Jackson County and that's established Far West. And when he gets to Far West in March, he's got to excommunicate them because they were taking church money, buying land in Far West for the saints, then selling it to the saints at a profit and pocketing the profit.
Yeah.
So he's reconsolidating, or I should say, he's reorganizing the church now when he's there.
For me, having that context of what was going on in Kirtland makes what happens where there's an effort to reconcile with Oliver Cowdery and it fails and Oliver is excommunicated. It's just so poignant and also scary because I imagine for the saints, having seen so many of their leaders turn against them and the church and seeking the prophet's blood and taking over the temple and them having to flee, the saints in Far West must have been very frightened of the same thing happening.
Yes, they were. And we're going to get to that because they do something about that in late June, early July. And it doesn't work in their favor, but they're trying to be a little proactive about it. We'll get to that before we talk about chapter 117.
Yeah.
So you've got Joseph reorganizing things, but I want to touch a little bit on Oliver Cowdery. You brought him up, and I'm really glad you did, because I threw out these accusations about what these guys were doing, right? And it may have been true, but Oliver Cowdery, to the end, said it wasn't true for him. He wasn't doing that. He was accused of things that were untrue. David Whitmer felt very much the same way. Oliver Cowdery, 10 years later, is able to forgive everybody and return to the church and humble himself, get rebaptized, and he dies in full fellowship. David Whitmer never got over it. Now, the reason why I believe Oliver Cowdery is because this guy, he had a lot of integrity. There are so many things that he did throughout his life that just prove his integrity that I doubt he really did it. But what was going on was you had Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer, two of the original people. They're two of the witnesses. They're two of the 11 witnesses, right? And they're holding high office. Oliver Cowdery is the second elder of the church. He's the assistant president. You've got David Whitmer, who's president of the church in the West. And you have all these new converts coming in. And some of these guys are very ambitious. They see Oliver and David, and they've got targets on their backs. And they're trying to take them out to create openings for themselves to advance in the church. And as you go through who all their enemies were, within 4 or 5 years, they're all gone. They all left the church through apostasy or excommunication. That's one of the reasons why I think Oliver may have been right. So that takes us up to the beginning of April. So now, April 6th is the 8th anniversary of the church. And Joseph Smith presides over a solemn assembly, reaffirming the first presidency, organizes the Far West stake leadership. So now, we don't have a church in the East and a church in the West. There's one church. It's in Far West. There's a first presidency over everything. He organizes a Far West stake leadership. And then from April 7th to April 25th, Joseph is holding regular councils to handle disputes, plan the city layout, receive some more revelation. He instructs church members how to live the law of consecration more perfectly. And the saints are laying out lots and farms near Far West. So this takes us up to D&C 115.
Okay.
April 26th.
Awesome. So in that context, I love verse 5. Verily I say unto you, arise and shine forth, that thy light may be a standard for the nations. And I think a big part of the reason that I love it is because I imagine the saints feeling a little bit like lying down in despair. The things have just been so difficult. And in the midst of all of that, the Lord's invitation is arise and shine forth. Be a light for the nations. Wow.
It's a beautiful verse. And it reminds me of what we talked about last week with Brigham Young and his statement. He said, listen, the saints had been through so much affliction, but they had come out of it all spiritually. They lost maybe a third of the leadership through that Kirtland apostasy, but they really didn't lose members. But they were fine spiritually as much as they had suffered. And this is also the verse just before that is when we get the current name of the church.
Yeah.
So prior to that, we had called ourselves the Church of Christ because it was Christ's church, but there's a lot of confusion with other Congregationalist churches. So they said, okay, we're the Church of the Latter-day Saints, because people, being generally Christian back then, understood that there were saints in the New Testament, and now we're trying to call ourselves the modern saints.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they renamed themselves that, the Church of the Latter-day Saints. But then here's Christ saying, okay, this is what it's going to be. And I love that President Nelson said, we need to really stand by that.
When he says, the Lord says, for thus shall my church be called in the last days. Not just thus shall my church be named, thus shall my church be called in the last days, even the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And President Nelson, let's call it the Lord says it should be called.
Exactly.
I love that.
Verse 6, I've had that highlighted in my scriptures for a long time. And let me just read it quickly. And that the gathering together upon the land of Zion and upon her stakes may be for defense and for a refuge from the storm and from wrath when it shall be poured out without mixture upon the whole earth. So this is where we get this idea of stakes in Zion. And when you look at the organization of the church, we have wards, geographically, wards and branches geographically set in a rather small geographical space, and then stakes, and then areas, etc. But this idea that we pull this all together because it provides a defense. And being a convert, coming from the outside in, I remember when we first started going to church, we had, I think my oldest son was 7 and my youngest was 4. And they start going to school, and they're in school with the same kids they're going to church with. And they're the same kids they're playing with in the neighborhood. That was a new experience for me. Prior to joining the church, we did not have an assigned time to go to church. We did not have...
They just showed up.
We didn't have an assigned building.
Yeah.
You went church shopping. And you went from church to church until you found a preacher that you liked and a congregation that you liked, and you went there. But nobody maybe lived in your neighborhood. It was a different social group. And so this idea of these stakes strengthen us and make for a defense. How much easier must it be to be a child with principles, being attacked from the outside, and you've got a friend there who has the same principles.
Yeah.
Or you start wandering a little bit, but you've got your church peer group right there pulling you back, hopefully. That's what they're doing. So I think it's brilliant. I think it's a brilliant plan.
Yeah.
It shouldn't surprise me.
And another thing I love as well, the fact that we have designated areas where we live, is also that we then have wards that have people from very different walks of life that might never interact at any other time. They have the opportunity, not just the opportunity, but actually the covenant call to learn to love and bless each other.
So home teaching was something that I struggled with when I first joined the church. I didn't like this idea that I was being assigned a friend. Or I should say I was being assigned to be a friend. And then I had a friend assigned to me. It was just something that just rubbed me wrong about that. And I was not a good home teacher. And then we had this great bishop who was like, Gunnar, I see you're struggling doing your home teaching. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to assign you and your wife. We're going to assign your wife to be your home teaching companion.
Bishop was so smith.
Yeah. And we're going to give you one family to home teach. And that's going to be my family. And I'm going to be your home teacher. Right. Me and my wife are going to be your home teacher. So we ended up spending a lot of time with them and started developing the habit, right? And eventually got more assignments and whatnot. And I remember on more than one occasion being assigned people to home teach who I was not, how should I say, I was not drawn to.
Yeah.
Right.
Kindred spirits.
Yeah. And the people I tend to be drawn to are people who are jovial, maybe a little bit too loud, who have a tendency to be excessively happy. Right.
Or I think a lot of us are drawn to those people.
So I remember having to home teach some people who were, goodness, they might have been 20 years or more older than myself, 30 years older. They may have been real quiet, shy. And as I was diligent about my home teaching, I grew to love these people quite a bit. And I learned that, wow, you know, it's really great to be assigned people to minister to who are not people you would have thought to. Yeah. At the end of the day, you may not have much in common other than the gospel, but that doesn't mean that you can't develop an interest. You can't find something about them to love and care for. Anyway, it was a good experience. Good experience.
That. Okay, one other thing in 115 that I would like to hit on before we move on.
Yeah.
Just after all of the hardship and the tremendous financial difficulty they're in right now. Verse 8, therefore I command you to build a house unto me for the gathering together of my saints that they may worship me. We're talking temple.
Yeah.
Let there be a beginning of this work and a foundation and a preparatory work this following summer, and let the beginning be made on the 4th day of July next, which is not a insignificant day, right? There's lots of symbolism in this. And from that time forth, let my people labor diligently to build a house unto my name. There's just so much that is inviting them to do that feels like another impossible task, right?
Yeah, and verse 13, the Lord says, don't get into debt on this.
Joseph and Sidney and Hiram, don't you go into debt. Yeah.
Don't you guys go into debt anymore for this. I think that's interesting. Yeah.
And part of what is interesting to me is that a few things I learned from this. Number one is the Lord always cares about temples. No matter what else is going on, the Lord cares about temples. He cares about those covenants. There's something very important going on there. Number two.
Joseph said the whole reason for the restoration was temples. Yeah.
Yeah. And later he would say that Zion will be wherever there is a temple. So the Lord cares about temples always, no matter what else is going on in our lives. The second thing, it's interesting to me here that he invites them to set a foundation and begin preparatory work. And then in verse 11, it says, and in 1 year from this day, let them recommence laying the foundation of my house. So he's not actually commanding them to build the house right now. Just do the preparatory work.
Yeah.
Lay the foundation. In a year, you're going to recommence.
And then on July 3rd, because they're supposed to dedicate this thing on the 4th.
Yeah.
On July 3rd, 500 men show up and they dig the foundation for the temple.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. This is everything they can do. It also says to me that in order to build Zion, we must always be moving toward that temple.
Yeah, that's a great point.
They couldn't do anything more than build a foundation right now on the last day of the allotted time. But if our eyes are on the temple, it reminds me of the call to have a temple recommend, even if you don't have a temple nearby. The temple matters.
Have you ever been to Far West?
Yes, I have.
I think Far West is gorgeous. I think it's a beautiful place, and it still seems so virgin. There are very few buildings there. The town, this big town, is gone.
Yeah.
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 I could see myself living in Far West, assuming there's a town there.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I liked walking around Far West, just kind of imagining
But it was.
being Joseph or seeing Joseph, or Joseph surely walked this way from the corner of the temple lot here to where the town center was, which isn't too far. Yeah, Joseph, surely, if I walk back and forth here enough, I'm sure I walked somewhere Joseph walked. You can't do that in Independence.
No.
Independence, the whole big city is there.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's all concrete. You can't imagine what it was like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Far West is sweet.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk on 116.
Let's do it.
I just want to say that 116, that is the place I remember from when I went out east to check out some church history, was Adam-on-Diomen, because I remember getting out of the vehicle and feeling the sacredness of the space.
It's another gorgeous place.
Is there much that happens between April 26th and May 19th?
It gets interesting in the middle of June.
Okay.
This period of time is administrative stuff, and he's laying out the new city. He's a poor farm boy. When he shows up in Far West, the leadership structure is gone because of the excommunications.
Yeah.
Yet the story of Joseph Smith is he fails, he gets up. 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 He gets thrown in jail. Then somehow he gets up, and he fails and gets up, fails and gets up. I mean, it's constant turmoil. Winston Churchill said, the secret of success is moving from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm. And sure, when you study the history of World War II, that's exactly what was happening with Churchill and England. After World War I, he was put on the sidelines for 20 years. But he never gave up. And I think the people who are successful in life, in whatever profession they choose, they don't see failure the way most people see it. Most of us see failure as just like devastating. And they see it as, that was a bad meal. Let's have good meals now. They're not going to stop eating because they had a bad meal.
Yeah. Yeah.
They just move on. That one didn't work. We'll just try something else.
Yeah.
And they don't see it as failure. They see it as learning a way to succeed that doesn't work. They learned that doesn't work, so let's do something different. That's my impression. And Joseph, of course, had the wonderful knowledge that God had his back. It wasn't just a belief. It wasn't just faith. He knew God had his back.
Yeah.
And he knew that if somehow he died, well, God still had his back. It just wasn't going to be here.
So as you talk about that, one of the thoughts that comes to me is that, first of all, Joseph Smith had a different definition of success than what most of us have. And I think that's a key to succeeding in the kingdom. Success is being in harmony with God. Success is going forward and doing as the Lord directs. And what happens in terms of the outcome, I know we're not there yet. But when the Lord talks to Oliver Granger in 117, he's going to say...
Let's do it. Let's go to 117. 116 is one verse.
Okay.
Let's move on.
So in 117, the Lord is talking to Oliver Granger, who's got the unenviable task of settling up the church's affairs in Kirtland. And the Lord tells him to remain, and then he says, let him contend earnestly for the redemption of the first presidency of my church. The redemption of the first presidency of my church is the paying of their debts. So let him contend earnestly, saith the Lord. And when he falls, not if, when he falls, he shall rise again, for his sacrifice shall be more sacred unto me than his increase, saith the Lord. And I just find that such a powerful statement of the Lord's attitude towards the things that he calls us to do. I'm hearing like this detaching of the outcome of our efforts from his pleasure in our efforts. He cares so greatly about the consecrated attitude with which we go forward, about the sacrifices that we make in seeking to build up the kingdom. If we succeed at that, we haven't failed, even if we don't manage to accomplish the goal we set out to accomplish.
Yeah, so have you ever known somebody, especially somebody close to you, who just would not do something for fear of failing? Just would not move forward.
Yeah.
And when I think about that as a parent,
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily looking for my child to run this marathon and come in first. But if they have a desire to run a marathon, I want to support them in practicing and getting in shape for the marathon and then running and doing the best they can. And I am fairly confident in saying that when you run that marathon and fail to come in first place,
Yeah.
all those sacrifices you made to make that happen
Yeah.
is more important to me
Yes.
than you coming in first place. I really don't care.
Yes. I love how
Right?
you're tying that really to the becoming.
Yeah. So I think, you say it's interesting how the Lord looks at this. I think we look at it that way too. When we think about things in our temporal world, the treasures that we have, our children.
Yeah.
When my kids were in elementary school, I remember sitting down with them and saying, early on, first grade, saying, I don't care what your letter grade is. I don't care if you get an A, B, C, D, F. I don't care. What I care about is your effort grade. Back then, I don't know how they grade things now. Back then, an E for effort was the highest you could get, right? And they had a whole scale. I said, I always want to see an E for effort. I understand that there are going to be subjects that you just don't resonate with you. And no matter how hard you try, you may never be able to get more than a C. But I don't want you to not try. And I want to see an E for effort on everything. And I'm not interested in A, B, C. I don't care. I want to see an excellent effort.
So I got to say, I have children who are gifted, and I have children that have learning disabilities. And when I think of the school experience of the kids who didn't ever have to study, could just sail through and be top of the class all the time, versus the school experience of the daughter that had dyslexia and worked hard all the time just to pull the grades that were acceptable for her. But wow, that work that she did, and she is the one who did it. She's the one who said, no, I don't want these accommodations because I want to really do this. She was quite determined that way. But what a difference that made in terms of her preparation for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Where she has just been, she is absolutely unafraid of hard work.
Yeah. I've seen in work, I had an office job, a white collar job. And one of the things I ran into quite a few times is the really smart people, the people who didn't have to do homework, who just could memorize things, didn't really have to take notes. They had instant recall on so many things. They would do very well in the early parts of their careers, maybe the first 10 years or so of their career. And then they would just hit a brick wall because no matter who you are, no matter how smart you are, at some point, you have to have an organization system. You've got so many balls in the air that you can't just memorize everything.
Yeah.
And you have to have a system to help keep you organized. And these people never developed that system. And so they would crash and burn after a while. And the people who did really well, I would say were probably, I don't know what letter grades they got, but I would say they weren't the straight A students. They had better social skills because they spent more time socializing than the straight A student folks did. They knew how to work better on teams because they probably spent time in sports or in theater or someplace where they couldn't do it all by themselves. Mm-hmm. And they had to develop systems for keeping things straight in their lives. Mm-hmm. And that instantly is transferable to work, especially if you get involved in project management of any kind.
Yeah.
So before we talk more about 117.
I'm dying for us to get to the history.
Okay. So this D&C 117 takes place on July 8th. And there are 4 revelations. This D&C 17, 18, 19, 20. All 4 of these happened on July 8th. The Lord was quite talkative that day.
So this is 4 days now after the dedication of the temple foundation.
That's correct. It's 4 days after the July 4th celebration. So now I'm going to back up to the middle of June and take us from the middle of June up until really it's July 4th, which these are the events leading into these revelations on July 8th. And, I can't say, I'm not trying to say definitively that these are the result of these historic events. These revelations are the result of these historic events. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying to me, it's endlessly fascinating what else had been going on that all the saints were dealing with, particularly Joseph. So leading up to July 8th, keep in mind, as I go through this, all the mobbing the saints had been dealing with up until this time. Joseph, from the time he was a child, from the time he was 14 years old, and said, hey, God came to talk to me and brought his son.
Yeah.
And even though he tried to keep that secret, because it was really precious to him, he did talk to a local preacher, and it got out, and people were unkind to him about this. He and Sidney were both tarred and feathered in March of 1832. And Edward Partridge, we talk about this less, Edward Partridge and Charles Allen were tarred and feathered in 1833 down in Jackson County. Edward Partridge was bishop at the time.
Right.
Charles Allen was just a member. He just happened to be with Bishop Partridge at the time, and he gets tarred and feathered. You've got David Whitmer, Isaac Morley, and others. We don't know how many others. We don't know who they were, but these guys were all held at gunpoint with a gun on their chest and ordered to deny the Book of Mormon, or they would be punished with instant death. Right? And so they're on their knees, and it's a beautiful story, because David Whitmer, when he was told, deny that Book of Mormon, I'm going to shoot you right now, there was a commander there who had 12 men lined up with their guns drawn, ready to shoot these guys, right? David Whitmer raised both his hands, and instead of denying the Book of Mormon, he instead bore witness to the Book of Mormon. And everybody put their guns down and left them alone. In today's dollars, the damages that were incurred in Jackson County through all of their ordeals, it's roughly $75 million between the homes and possessions that were stolen from them, taken from them, their cattle, et cetera, et cetera. Right. That's based on affidavits that were then collected by Joseph Smith at a later time. They've got this constant problem with mobs. Now, after all this disaffection that had been happening by the time Joseph comes to Far West is in this mess of people who need to be excommunicated. They call them dissenters because they're quite vocal about their negative feelings towards the church. And Joseph would say, you hear it sometimes today, that people leave the church, but they won't leave it alone.
Can't leave it alone.
Yeah. And so they're dealing with these dissenters, and the dissenters are getting vocal. They're getting hit with lawsuits. If you read it from the church's perspective, and I'm not talking about the church in Salt Lake now, I'm saying even at that time, they're saying these are just vexatious lawsuits. They're just a nuisance. They were stirring up trouble.
Yeah.
So on June 17th, Sidney Rigdon delivers a very famous sermon, the text of which we don't have. But we know that he delivered the sermon from people's journals, and it's come to be called the Salt Sermon. And he used as his text Matthew 5:13, "Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and trodden under the foot of men." People took Sidney's words to mean that the dissenters no longer had their savor, and they were to be cast out and trodden underfoot, purged from the community. So that got the membership
riled up,
feeling, okay, they just got a call to action. 2 days later, on June 19th, you get this, what's come to be called the Danite Manifesto. And it's a warning letter that's addressed to Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, John Whitmer, W.W. Phelps, and Lyman Johnson. And it catalogs their offenses and gives them 3 days to leave Caldwell County or face force. Exact quote says, "You shall have 3 days to depart, for go you shall depart, or more fatal calamity shall befall you." 83 saints signed this letter.
They signed their names.
Yeah,
Whoa.
Joseph Smith's did not sign it. His name, that doesn't appear on it.
Yeah.
And then you get sometime between then and July 4th, you get the Constitution of the Society of the Daughter of Zion, which later is called the Danites.
This is Samson of Ard's lovely secret combination.
Yeah. So it's an extra legal enforcement group that's meant to proactively protect the church from both external and internal foes and dissent. Its charter is to drive from the county of Caldwell all those who dissented from the Mormon church. So it's called the Society of the Daughter of Zion. But by the end of July, Joseph notes in his journal that they exist to put to rights physically that which is not right, when it cannot be put to rights by teaching and persuasions. So that the temperature is rising on the side of the saints, right? They have been tremendously abused. They continue to be abused. They've now created this vigilante organization, which is not entirely dissimilar from other antebellum vigilante groups, but that doesn't excuse it. But now you have this warring unit at the disposal of the leadership of the church. They've got a whole charter and a military structure, but rather than taking direction from a general or from the president or the governor, they're taking it from the church leadership, specifically the first presidencies where they're supposed to get their direction from. And then Sidney Rigdon delivers what's called the 4th of July Oration. Now, this oration, we have the full text. You can find it in the Joseph Smith papers. The saints were so proud of it that they printed it up into pamphlets and distributed it all throughout the county to Mormons and non-Mormons alike. In many ways, it's a very beautiful speech about the founding fathers, the founding of the country, the liberties that were to be guaranteed, and how wonderful it is that we live in this enlightened society. Remembering that this is 1838, these people, their parents, their uncles, fought in the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War was not that long ago.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't their parents, it was their grandparents. But it was pretty near history, close history. So let me just give you a few quotes from this oration. Early on, the first page or so, he says, "We have been taught from our cradles to reverence the fathers of the Revolution and venerate the very urns which contain the ashes of those who sleep. And every feeling of our hearts responds in perfect unison to the precept. Our country and its institutions are written on the tablet of our hearts, as with the blood of the heroes who offered their lives in sacrifice to redeem us from oppression." It's a beautiful poetry. And he goes on to relate this oppression theme, right? And kind of pull it through his talk and connect it to all the mobs that they're dealing with. He eventually goes on, he says, "But notwithstanding all this violence, we can say, as did Paul to the Corinthians, we are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed." It's a wonderful way to express what the saints were going through. And I think when we see Charlie Kirk assassinated, when we see what happened in Michigan just a couple of weeks ago, we are troubled But I think we shouldn't be distressed, right? We are perplexed, but not in despair. I think we can take hope from Paul's words here. I think they relate directly
Yeah.
to us.
Totally. Yes.
He goes through this whole speech and he winds it up in an extraordinarily bloodthirsty manner. B.H. Roberts, who wrote the first history of the church, called it an unfortunate address because it's this statement that starts the Missouri-Mormon Wars, which take place over the summer of 1838 and end with Joseph Smith being put in Liberty Jail. He says, he being Sidney, says, "We take God and all the holy angels to witness this day that we warn all men in the name of Jesus Christ to come on us no more forever. For from this hour we will bear it no more. Our rights shall no more be trampled on with impunity. The man or the set of men who attempts it does it at the expense of their lives. And that mob that comes on us to disturb us, it shall be between us and them a war of extermination. For we will follow them till the last drop of their blood is spilled, or else they will have to exterminate us. For we will carry the seat of war to their own houses and their own families, and one party or the other shall be utterly destroyed. Remember it then, all men, we will never be the aggressors. We will infringe on the rights of no people, but shall stand up for our own until death. We claim our own rights." And so it was Sidney who first used that term extermination when talking about the Missouri mobs. This is July. 3 months later, Governor Boggs issues the extermination order against the Mormons. So my point here is that in this history, it's very easy for me sitting in my air-conditioned home, having access to a world of information from my desk. It's very easy for me to second guess what they were going through, but they had reached their limits, right? They had Joseph, his family, all the saints had been chased out of Kirtland, chased out of Jackson County. And really, what did they want? When it all comes down to it, why was Joseph being persecuted so much? Because he wanted to know which church to join.
Yeah.
And he was naive enough to ask God. Joseph comes out of Liberty Jail a different man. And we can talk about that more in another podcast. But he approved this talk. We don't have that in writing, but he was on the stand when this talk was delivered, and several people recorded in their journals that Joseph appeared to prove what Sidney was saying. Mm-hmm. And I can see how they may have felt that saying, listen, we're not dealing with this anymore. Because when they were in Jackson County, Joseph kept saying, he issued a revelation that said, take it once, take it twice, take it 3 times, but if they come on you a 4th time, then you can defend yourself, right?
And it says, warn them.
Yeah.
That warn them that if they come again.
Yeah. But nonetheless, I prefer that you not do that.
Yeah.
And go through the judicial process.
Yeah.
And that didn't seem to work. That landed them in far west. So now they're trying something else. But this is not a revelation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. This is people who have been driven out, and they are terrified of anybody who's coming against them again because they don't want it to happen again.
Yeah. They're trying to say, just leave us alone.
Yeah.
But they felt they needed to use some very strong language.
Mm-hmm. Language reminds me of what Moroni said to Amram. Okay? So after the Amalickiah and Amram came and invaded the Nephites, Amram decides he wants to get rid of all these Nephite prisoners who are eating his food that has to be brought in all the way from Lamanite territory, right? He sends out a request for a prisoner exchange. And Moroni, he wants to use a strategy to get the most prisoners back possible. So he says, sure, I'll do an exchange with you on the condition that for every man I give you, you give us a man and a woman and child. Like, give us the families. Though we will not deliver up a man. Save it. That on the condition that you give up, along with the man, his wife and his children. And if you'll do that, I'll exchange. And then he says, this is in Alma 54, verse 12. And remember, this is Captain Moroni. This is that merciful guy who loves to, as soon as the Lamanites are getting starting to feel nervous that they're about to be destroyed, every time he has them surrounded, he's like, okay, wait. All right, do you guys want to stop? Make an oath that you're not going to come again, and we'll let you go. Okay, so that's who's talking here. And he says in Alma 54, verse 12, and behold, if ye do not this, I will come against you with my armies. Yea, even I will arm my women and my children. And I will come against you, and I will follow you even into your own land, which is the land of our first inheritance. Yea, and it shall be blood for blood, yea, life for life, and I will give you battle until you are destroyed from off the face of the earth. Behold, I am in my anger, and also my people. Ye have sought to murder us, and we have only sought to defend ourselves. But behold, if ye seek to destroy us more, we will seek to destroy you. Yea, and we will seek our land, the land of our first inheritance.
It is very similar.
It's very similar. And then in the very next chapter, he takes the city of Gid without bloodshed. Like, he's spouting off at the mouth, trying to make an impression on someone. And he is angry enough that at that moment, he's able to spout off convincingly. In this case, it was very convincing.
Yeah, I wonder if Sidney took inspiration from that. Or maybe if Sidney and Joseph even conferred and said, let's do a Captain Moroni. I don't know.
I wonder too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do wonder that too. Yeah. I understand that desperate feeling. I've never been there, but I can imagine that desperate feeling and that sense of, okay, that this is like, we have to make a solid line. This is battle. It is us versus them. And we're not going to put up with anything more. And I feel concerned because of the polarization that's occurring in our society, that there is that tendency that we have to often misunderstand the people that we perceive as enemies. Like you just went through Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer and how they may not have been guilty of what they were accused of. And this may have been a situation where there were other things at work and there could have been reconciliation and there wasn't because people were coming to it already defensive. And then I think of General Conference, which was last weekend, and Elder Stevenson's talk, the first talk. And at a time when we are so liable right now to take on that spirit of battle, Elder Stevenson gave us a quite different challenge when he talked about a 1-week peacemaker plan. He talks about contention-free home zone and then digital bridge building. I just wanted to share this because I loved it so much. Before posting, replying, or commenting online, ask, will this build a bridge? If not, stop. Do not send. Instead, share goodness. Publish peace in the place of hate. In 117, poor Newell Whitney is being asked to basically abandon his store and his livelihood in Kirtland, right?
Yeah.
He has already forgiven massive debts. He's probably taken a great big hit with the Kirtland Safety Society, and now the Lord is saying, come on, Newell. You got to come out to Far West. You got to leave the store behind. And I love verses 6 through 8, where he puts this in perspective for Newell, and he puts it in perspective for me. For have I not the fowls of the air, and also the fish of the sea, and the beasts of the mountains? Have I not made the earth? Do I not hold the destinies of all the armies of the nations of the earth? Therefore will I not make solitary places to bud and to blossom, and to bring forth in abundance, saith the Lord? Is there not room enough on the mountains of Adam-on-Diammon and on the plains of Olaha-Shineha, or the land where Adam dwelt, that you should covet that which is but the drop, and neglect the more weighty matters. For me, that language reminds me of the Lord's power to take care of me financially. I'm not trying to say that we don't want to practice sound financial principles, but when the Lord calls upon us to consecrate, to remember that this is the God who created the earth. And then I think of like Jesus says to Peter when they come to him asking for taxes and they don't have any money. And Jesus says, okay, Peter, go fishing. And you're going to find a fish that has a coin in its mouth. And that's going to be enough taxes for you and me. And off he goes. God has the power to care for us financially. He does. And it's just going back again to what we talked about last week about what is our treasure and what is God's treasure. What he wants of us is that we treasure what he treasures. And then we'll be okay. We really will.
Yeah. So this brings a tithing story to mind. And I think it's probably more appropriate for 119 to talk about this. So I'm going to talk about it anyway here.
Okay, yeah, we're skipping ahead to 119 right now.
Okay.
We can come back.
Yeah. Okay, so 119 is about tithing, but we were relatively young in the church, and we hadn't been able to pay our tithing. We were very strapped. We didn't have any money. And I remember one day I got a bill. It was a tax bill, something that something that you can't like put off or do something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or renegotiate or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it was like, I want to say it was like $900. And then we didn't have it. And I remember turning to my wife and I was like, sweetheart, the only chance we have of paying this bill is to pay our tithing. And the reality is that we paid it. And we didn't lose our house. I don't remember suffering anything. Right? We paid it.
Yeah.
I don't remember $900 suddenly showing up.
Yeah.
But what I do remember is my oldest son was like outgrowing his clothes. We couldn't afford any clothes for him. And that might have been what the trade-off was. It might have been, okay, we can't buy him clothes. We have to pay this bill. And now he's not going to have clothes. But I was coaching soccer and we showed up for soccer practice one day. And one of the ladies came over to my wife with one of these black garbage bags full of kids' clothes, right? And they were brand new kids' clothes. They still had the tags and everything on them. Wow. And she said, can you use some clothes? Because my son is growing too fast. I bought all these clothes for him, but he's outgrown them and he hasn't even worn them. And Trudy looked at them. They were hundreds of dollars worth of clothes. Back when hundreds of dollars meant something.
Yeah.
He had a whole brand new wardrobe. Now, looking back at it, the thought occurred to me, maybe she noticed he needed clothes and came up with a story. But what I do know is we got a bunch of clothes from nowhere. And we've always credited that to tithing. And it was our first experience with tithing.
What a beautiful expression of faith. The only way we're going to be able to pay this bill is if we pay our tithing. Not, we can't afford our tithing this year or this month because we have to pay this bill, but the other way around, the only way we can pay. And I just got to share with you a story. So I served my mission in Brazil, and this one lady, Lola, was just this beautiful soul. And when we first started to teach her, she told us, I love your church. I love your church. I want to join your church, but I can't. Because she had been tricked into a relationship with a man who, once he had her in the relationship, disclosed that he was married, right? Mm-hmm. And when she tried to break off the relationship, he suffered a heart attack and was calling her name in the hospital. Like it was that, and she couldn't resist that need. So she said, I can't join your church. And the other thing was she was a pensioner and she wasn't getting paid nearly enough to make ends meet. And he was helping her with the bills. And we just said, keep reading the Book of Mormon. She goes away for a couple months to go visit her daughter, who is a member of the church. And when she comes back and we go to visit her, she said, I have no more desire for that relationship. It is gone. I will not continue in that relationship. So she decides to join the church. And then a couple months after that, I was transferred from the area, and then I was teaching English as a second language in the stake building, and she came to our lessons, right? But we're teaching the English as a second language as an opportunity to get to know people. And at the end of each lesson, we ask if anybody has questions. So we ask if anybody has questions. And of course, the question comes up about tithing. Do you guys have to give 10% of all your income to the church? And Lola's there, and she raises her hand. She says, can I answer that? And she stood up and she said that in order to join the church, she had to lose a significant source of income. And she didn't know how she was going to make ends meet, but she paid her tithing. And then she gets tears in her eyes and she says, I just got back from the bank and I have more money in my account right now than I have ever had at this point in the month before. No idea how. But just that faith, like there was so much faith in Lola's heart over and over. I just love that.
Yeah, there's a story. I don't know if it's true. There's a story of Brigham Young talking to somebody, and I'm just going to say Brother Brown. And he's talking to him, and he says, Brother Brown, if you had 2 homes, and I asked you to give me one of your homes, this is when Brigham Young's president of the church, would you give me one of your homes? He says, oh, yes, President. Yes, you know, Brother Brigham, I would give you one of my homes. He says, well, if you had 2 coaches and I needed one of your coaches, would you give me one of your coaches? He said, absolutely, Brother Brigham, I would give you one of my coaches. Absolutely. You just ask and I would give it to you if I had 2 coaches. He says, Brother Brown, if I asked you to give me one of your horses, would you give me one of your horses? And he pauses. He says, I don't understand. You said you'd give me one of your houses, you'd give me one of your coaches. Why wouldn't you give me one of your horses? And Brother Brown says, well, President, I have 2 horses. That sometimes is the problem when push comes to shove. When
It's easier to be generous with the Lord in theory than it is in practice.
Yeah.
And yet the Lord's promise is, put me first and I will open the windows of heaven.
It's one of the problems I think that we have as human beings. I was reading a report a while back, and it said that most people, when asked to rate themselves what economic strata they're in, most people say they're middle class, which is not true. And they said most wealthy people consider themselves middle class. And I think the issue is that if you can imagine having more money, or if you know that there are people who have more money, then you have a tendency to think that I'm deprived, that I don't have enough. Honestly, I know that there are people who don't have enough. Okay, I'm not trying to say that people who say they don't have enough don't have enough, but I'm saying as you acquire money and you have things and you're not struggling financially, there's always something you can't afford.
Yeah.
No matter how much money you've got, there's always something you can't afford. And so you have this consciousness of insufficiency. You feel like you can't just give stuff away because you're lacking. You still can't afford that $2 million boat. You still can't afford that $40 million airplane. You still can't. There's something you can't buy. And so therefore you can't give. There was a speech. I wish I could recall who it was from, but it was given at a BYU devotional. And the speaker said, if you don't donate to charity when you don't have money, you're never going to donate when you do have money. He says you need to make charitable contributions part of who you are.
So I want to say from the other side, okay,
Yeah.
there is power in always perceiving yourself as having capacity to give. When I was a single mom with 5 children and living in my parents' house they were serving a mission. And so I was in their house, and I was living in Canada, we have a child tax benefit. And I had 5 children. And the child tax benefit fed us. One of my daughters she really struggled with letting go of anything. And so in order to get her to give up her old clothes that no longer fit, I said, sweetheart, we need to gather up the things we don't need anymore and give them to the poor. Let's take it down to the thrift store, and we're going to give our things to the poor, which was something we had done, because there's always, even when you don't have any money, you still have things you don't need anymore. So I said, we need to give it to the poor. And she says, who are the poor? And I went,
Yeah.
it was the first moment that I realized we were the poor. I hadn't realized it.
Did she, when she asked that question?
No,
was it that
no,
had
she was
realized
young enough. It was a genuine question. Who are the poor?
Yeah.
And I'm like, it was pretty empowering, realize that, yeah, we were the poor and we could still give.
So in this section of the D&C, it talks about people donating their surplus property. It talks about they shall pay a tenth of their increase annually. And there was some trouble when they implemented this because people didn't feel like they had surplus. They would say, my brother's going to be moving into the area. I want to have some land for him.
Yeah.
They'd say, I want to save this property for my children. I want to be able to give them each an acre when they come of age, or something like this. Brigham Young had left some notes about that, about how that became a little bit of a challenge. But that doesn't mean that they had that challenge with everybody.
Because they built a temple.
Yes. In the journal history from 1849, let me just read a little section here. It says, once they had become established in the Great Basin, so this is now talking about Salt Lake, right? And how they were working through this and the way it worked, because you got 3 different kinds of tithe happening here. LDS pioneers were expected to pay 3 types of tithes. They're tithing on their property, tithing on their increase, and tithing on their labor. The Apostle Parley P. Pratt on October 7th, 1849, gave perhaps the first Utah discourse that details the triple tithe. First, he said, to fulfill the law of tithing, a man should make out and lay before the presiding bishop, then Newell K. Whitney, a schedule of all his property and pay him the 10th of it. That is, he should pay a one-time initiatory tithe on all property he possessed. When he has tithed his principal once, Pratt continued, he has no occasion to tithe again on that property. But the next year, he must pay 1/10 of his increase of cattle, money, goods, and trade. A member also owed the 10th of his time, a labor tithe of each 10th day of man, young man, and work animals and wagons for the days not devoted to producing income or increase. My only point there is that the Lord's gotten a little more lenient with us. But I think it was just a beautiful thing that the saints did by consecrating their time and all that they had in that way. You know, my father, who was not a member of the church, paid tithing to the church.
Wow.
Because he had a testimony of tithing.
Wow.
But he didn't go to church. He didn't go to any church. And he just felt that. And he lived with us the last 10 years of his life. Yeah. And he said, I'm living here now. You and Trudy go to this church, and I have a lot of friends because of this church. I'm getting a lot of blessings from the church. He says, and I've been sending my tithing off to some televangelist. He says, would it be a problem if I just tithe to your church?
No problem.
So we talked to the bishop, and we worked that all out. He was very good about paying his tithing.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That is beautiful. So one thing I love about this is in verse 6, where it's talking about this law of putting the Lord first financially, right? Consecrating. And I say unto you, if my people observe not this law to keep it holy, and by this law sanctify the land of Zion unto me, behold, verily I say unto you, it shall not be a land of Zion unto you. Just this whole concept that we make our property holy, we sanctify it as we pay our tithing.
Yeah, we had a conversation a few podcasts ago about sanctification. What is that process of sanctification? What does it look like? How do you sanctify something? And right here talks about sanctifying the land. And we know they had lots of problems, and they're coming. They're on the horizon.
Yeah.
And we know that Brigham Young was saying at this particular time that he was having trouble getting a lot of the saints to consecrate their properties.
So I guess for me, the question is, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for us? So
Yeah.
what do we do? Because for one thing, we did talk just a few minutes ago that if we cannot give when we're poor, we will never give. As we look back on them and the kind of situation they were in, they really were poor. Most of them, weren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I have such abundance compared to those forebears. So what do we do? Because I feel like what the Lord keeps inviting us in order to build Zion is, let my kingdom be your priority. Let that be what you're seeking. How do we get there? How do we get there individually? How do we get there as a people, right? How are we doing? And I think we have to look in our own hearts to figure out how we're doing.
Yeah. I'm not in a position to judge anybody.
No.
I think that there's always room for improvement. I've wondered sometimes when President Nelson would talk about need to make repentance a daily process. I'm like, my goodness, President, what are you repenting from? Because surely the things I'm repenting from, you mastered a long time ago. You're on to something else.
Yeah.
I didn't start playing golf until I was 42 years old. And I did it out of necessity because that was where all the big things happened at work. I was on the golf course. So I figured I had to figure out how to play golf.
So you had to.
And one of the things I quickly learned was that nobody's good at it. Everybody has a good shot every once in a while. Some have more good shots than bad shots. But at some point, everybody ends up in the sand trap or ends up out of bounds. It's a game that always challenges you and you can always improve on. You walk off the golf course with a vision of what's possible. Because no matter how bad you are, there's some moment during those 18 holes where you hit the ball perfectly.
Yes.
And you're like, I can do that again. I got to keep coming back and I got to keep doing this because I can do it. I know it's in me somewhere because I did it once.
Yeah.
I feel like that's that repentance process. You do good sometimes and then you don't. So you know you can do better. So wherever you are on that whole scale, that whole continuum of being a saint, wherever you are, you can do a little bit better. And it's not a bad thing. It's good that you have this vision of what better can look like for you. You don't need to be looking at the far end of the spectrum and saying that, oh, I'll never get there. Just improve on 5-foot putts. And that's what repentance is about. It's practice.
Can I just say, I love that positive approach to repentance. Yeah. Instead of repentance being focused, like what I've just heard is repentance, part of the repentance process is processing what you did well.
Yeah.
Being able to look at it and say, yes, this felt right. This was good. This is what I want more of. That is just such a beautiful approach to repentance. I want to implement that.
Good.
I love that.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
And then at some point, hopefully, I'll get so good at repenting that I'll start repenting for the same things that some of the general authorities are repenting from.
I love it. Are we ready for the wrap up?
Just before it, if I could, on D&C 120, I just think
Yes.
the interesting story
Yes.
about DNC 120 is it's very short, and it's just saying there needs to be a council
Yeah.
that over the distribution of tithes and offerings. And it just explains quickly who's in that council. And it's the first presidency, it's the bishops, the high council, this kind of thing. It's a council that decides, makes these decisions. And it's one of the reasons why things became a mess in Jackson County and even were kind of a mess in far west before Joseph got there, because you had W. Phelps, John Whitmer, David Whitmer. They were acting completely independent of any council. And if you gave them the money, they went and just did it. They made decisions on their own. And there's just this wisdom of councils. And
Yeah.
when we talk about the learnings, we said, what did we learn this week? For me, I think it's about what have I learned and what theme do I keep hearing over and over again from week to week. One of the overarching threads that's running through the DNC is the importance of councils, the importance of counseling together, and this problem that ended up in these men being excommunicated because they were just making executive decisions without involving anybody else. It'd be one or two of them making decisions. And Joseph was adamant about councils. When it came to the Nauvoo Expositor in 1844, when that thing was printed, just 19 days before Joseph gets killed, Joseph is the mayor of Nauvoo. He's sitting on the city council of Nauvoo, and he wants that press destroyed. They meet together on the 8th to talk about it, and he's saying we need to destroy this press, but the council was not unified. And so they adjourned and decided to meet again on the 10th of June. And it wasn't until everybody agreed that they should destroy the press that they went ahead and issued the order to destroy the press, that they voted it a public nuisance, which gave them the right legally to destroy the press. And then Joseph issues the order to destroy the press. So even then, he's not moving forward without a council decision to move forward when he knew what needed to be done. That press needed to be destroyed. And it was wonderful to see him with so much power. Then in Nauvoo, so much power. He's
still deferring to it.
He's lieutenant general, highest ranking military officer in the state of Illinois. He's the mayor. He's the president of the church. He's the prophet, and still not making a unilateral decision. I've sat in so many councils and never really thought about the incredible wisdom of the councils. So often it's another meeting I got to go to. But there's so much wisdom in councils, and that's, to me, just really hit me hard this week.
I am so glad you shared that, because I was just yesterday learning about the Council of 50. That governed in Nauvoo times. And I was also struck by that expectation that they would not make, that it wasn't, although Joseph was the prophet and he was presiding at the Council of 50, that they made their decisions by consensus, by unanimous agreement. I love that concept. I think it shows a great deal. It shows a great deal of his confidence in the Lord, that the Lord would reveal his will to the body governing council.
And a lot of humility, because I'm not so sure that people wouldn't have said, Joseph, I think most people would have been just fine for Joseph, just make a decision. It also helped create so much unity because it was a group decision. Lots of people were involved.
And there were 3 non-members on that council.
That's also true with the city council. They weren't all members.
Which is just beautiful. That's how we build Zion, by reaching across our differences, listening to each other. I think that leads into our song today.
I think it might.
Gunnar, can you play that for us?
Love to.
Everywhere I go with you. Everyone I know is with me too. Always inside me, my friends, my hopes, my love, and you. Many people come and people go. Starting once again is hard, I know. But home's where the heart is. I know my heart will be with you. So on cold and timid days I'll kneel and pray, and that's okay. You gave it all for me for eternity. You're here with me, you're part of me. Everywhere I'll be, you'll be with me. Always here inside my soul, I'll be. So I'll love and I'll cry, knowing you'll be nearby. And life is beautiful with you, my Lord. Always so beautiful with you, Christ, my
I love that. I'm really curious to hear about the story behind it, Gunnar.
So I wrote that song a long time ago when I lived in California. In 1999, I was offered a transfer to Atlanta. So we're moving to Atlanta. That ward was the ward that baptized us. We felt very close to that ward. I think everybody
bet.
felt really close to us.
Yeah.
We were a project, ward-wide project. Right?
I think you were a ward-wide blessing.
Thank you for that. So I felt like I should write a song to say goodbye to the ward. And that was my goodbye song to the ward. In a way, I wanted to let them know I will always remember them. And I also wanted to let them know that I had a testimony of the restoration of the church. That's what that song was saying. Everywhere I go with you. The you is them, the you is Christ, the you is the gospel.
Yeah. I love how that ties up them, and they are the ones who brought you to your testimony of Jesus Christ, who helped you obtain it. And I think of the saints as they were seeking to build Zion in Far West. And that sense of belonging to each other and trusting the Lord to always be with us.
Yeah, I think that's what made it, that's what got them through.
Yeah.
They were in Kirtland, they were in Jackson County, they were in Far West, they were in Nauvoo, they were in Quincy, they were in Montrose. Then they end up in Utah. But the bottom line is wherever they went with you. They went with Christ.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Rebecca.
That is beautiful. And speaking of being with you, Gunnar, it is always such a delight to discuss the gospel with you and learn from you. And you who are watching and listening and supporting, it is such a delight to be with you. Thank you for joining us today. We're still learning just like you, and we'll hope to see you again next week.